Always nice to see so many of you at our webinar. So welcome to iTrust webinar on guidelines and testbed for maritime cybersecurity. My name is Mark Goh and I'll be your MC for this webinar. This is the fourth webinar that iTrust is organizing around this topic. For those who have missed the first three webinars, the slides and recordings are available on iTrust website. And before we begin, iTrust wishes to thank the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, MPA, as well as the Singapore Maritime Institute, SMI, for their support in this webinar. We also like to thank SMI for funding iTrust to carry out this research study. And here is the program for today's webinar. Priyanka, yeah. So Mr. Tan Cheng Peng, the Executive Director of SMI, will deliver his welcome remarks. And Priyanka, our Senior Research Assistant, will summarize the team's year-long findings together in her presentation on a cyber risk assessment and security tier model, along with a sample checklist for shipboard OT systems. Professor Jining Zhou, the study's principal investigator, will then share the next phase of our maritime research in the form of a maritime testbed for cybersecurity research. And we are also honored to have with us Captain Ashwin from Singapore Polytechnic, who will share his experience as a shipmaster on maritime cybersecurity. We will then have about 20 minutes to take questions and feedback from the audience. So please hold your questions till then. Then Mr. Daniel Zhang, the Executive Director of the Center of Excellence in Maritime Safety at Singapore Polytechnic, will deliver his closing remarks. And so, without further ado, it is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Tan to give his welcome remarks. Mr. Tan, please.
Okay, 1 second. Thanks, Mark, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the fourth Maritime Cybersecurity webinar on guidelines and testbed for maritime cybersecurity. Let me first thank iTrust Center for Research in Cybersecurity in the Singapore University of Technology and Design for organizing this webinar, which is supported by the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, Singapore Maritime Institute, and the Center of Excellence in Maritime Safety in Singapore Polytechnic. The proliferation of cyber crimes is on a well-known uptrend that has plagued many industry sectors. The shipping industry is also not spared as well. Cyber crimes is fueled by the increase in integration of new enabling technologies such as IoT and big data, digitalization, increasing ease of connectivity with 5, 6G and satellite comms. Shipboard operational technology, or OT systems, are now also vulnerable to an unprecedented level of cyber threats, both in magnitude and severity. It is with these heightened industry concerns that the Singapore Maritime Institute funded iTrust to conduct a study on cyber risk management of shipboard OT systems. I would like to commend iTrust for having done a great job in putting together the best practices as a starting guideline for maritime authorities and ship owners in Singapore and perhaps even around the world to better manage cyber risk of shipboard OT systems. This project was initiated in line with SMI's 2030 R&D roadmap for maritime cybersecurity. The guidelines developed not only serves as the initial baseline for future maritime cybersecurity research, it also demonstrated Maritime Singapore as a regional thought leader in the domain of maritime cybersecurity. In this, I'm happy to note that the guidelines will also be shared by MPA as an information paper at IMO's 105th session of the Maritime Safety Committee meeting this year, under the agenda item Measures to Enhance Maritime Security. On top of this, the guidelines were also used to support the Singapore Registry of Ships notations for the cyber category, which was launched by MPA in November last year. The cyber notation is awarded to vessels that have adopted advanced cyber security measures to protect their shipboard OT systems from cyber attacks. These are two very important and concrete outcomes from the study. While this seminar marks the completion of the study, the efforts needed to build maritime cyber resiliency in our ecosystem remains far from finished. This is just but the first step. In the next phase, I'm pleased to share that iTrust is now working with the Center of Excellence in Maritime Safety in Singapore Polytechnic and the American Bureau of Shipping to conceptualize, design, and set up a state-of-the-art cyber-physical maritime testbed for cybersecurity research, training, exercise, and education. This OT cyber testbed facility will have remote linkages with the Advanced Navigation Research Simulator hosted at Singapore Polytechnic. This linkage will allow both centers to conduct research and enhance training of maritime professionals simultaneously, complementing and working together in both domains of maritime safety and cybersecurity. It leverages on iTrust and CMS complementary domain expertise to improve Maritime Singapore's overall cyber resiliencies. More details on this Phase 2 project will be announced by SMI and iTrust when it is ready later this year. So without much further ado, I wish all of you a fruitful webinar session ahead. And let me hand over to Marco from iTrust. Thank you.
Thank you, Edie. I will now hand over to Priyanka, our research assistant, for the webinar proper.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mark. A pleasant morning, everybody. I'm Priyanka from iTrust, and today I will be sharing with you about our new guidelines for cyber risk management. So in response to the growing cyber threat landscape in the maritime sector, we have developed new guidelines for cyber risk management, focusing on shipboard operational technology systems. So looking at the background, cybersecurity has become a vital subject for the maritime industry to consider with the increasing adoption of ICT to enhance maritime operations. So despite their many benefits, digitalization and interconnectivity still poses a significant threat to maritime operations, and that can result in catastrophic consequences. And it can also incur reputational and economic loss for the company, which might take years to recover. So due to the increasing need for the maritime sector to understand the cyber risk and adopt effective mitigation strategies, we saw the need to establish a guideline for cyber risk management. So ship owners can adopt the recommended best practices for managing the risk, and also maritime authorities can use the guidelines to assess or inspect the cyber hygiene of their vessels. So various technical advancements in the maritime industry have led to a rise in cyber threats, which has in turn spurred the maritime industry to implement good cybersecurity practices on board ships and even ports. So a few maritime cybersecurity guidelines have been published by various organizations, such as the International Maritime Organization, Baltic and International Maritime Council, the American Bureau of Shipping, the European Network and Information Security Agency, Det Norske Veritas, and so on. So these are the list of related guidelines and documents reviewed in this study. So based on the review of these guidelines, while they do discuss maritime cyber risk management, their intended audiences are those at the management levels. So on the contrary, our guidelines focus on managing risks in shipboard OT systems, with the target audiences being those responsible for implementing cybersecurity. So based on our research and data analysis, we saw the need to produce a new guideline that can be readily adopted by those responsible for cybersecurity in their respective organizations. And this includes IT system specialists, OT system specialists, engineers, and vessel inspectors. So our guideline considers the balance of risks and costs, and a tiered security approach is taken for mitigating the risk, and also the guidelines are feasible for adoption. The first edition of our guidelines is already published and is available for download in iTrust website. Also, we had conducted a series of 3 webinars previously to exhibit the results from our study. So those slides and recordings can be accessed from iTrust website too. So next, let me take you through the details of the new guidelines, which includes cyber risk, mitigation strategies, cyber risk assessment, and a checklist with tiered security approach. So as I mentioned earlier, the new guidelines are focused on managing the risks in shipboard OT systems that are crucial for the day-to-day vessel operations. So this includes communication systems, propulsion, machinery, and power control systems, navigation systems, and cargo management systems. So these systems are vulnerable to cyber attacks due to various weaknesses in the system itself or in the network to which they are connected. So in the first phase of this study, we analyzed the possible attack scenarios. And so these are some of the cyber risks that we have addressed in the guideline. So the team also submitted a journal article on this part titled "A Cyber Risk Study in Shipboard OT Systems," and it is now published in the SNAME's 40th Annual Journal. So after identifying the cyber risks, we framed a set of actionable mitigation measures for managing those risks. So some of the mitigation measures are listed in the guideline. So ship operators, ship owners, engineers, and specialists must be aware of the potential cyber risk and also look into the necessary mitigating actions to be taken in order to manage the risk. So next, in order to assess the cyber risk, a risk assessment methodology is also detailed in our guidelines. Assessing the risks will help in determining the severity of the risk, and this in turn can help to identify the places where cybersecurity controls need to be freshly implemented or improvised. Also, as system conditions are dynamic in nature, it is good to perform risk assessment frequently. So in the risk assessment approach detailed in the guideline, risk score is calculated for each risk in an OT subsystem using a 4x4 risk score matrix. So we consider two factors, which is likelihood and severity. Likelihood is the possibility that a cyber incident will occur, while severity is the impact caused by the occurrence of a cyber incident. So the risk score will be the product of these two factors. So in our guidelines, a 4-step scale definition is defined to assess the severity and likelihood of a cyber risk. So to summarize, the likelihood of a risk can be evaluated based on various factors, such as attack complexity, the attacker's ease of access to the necessary resources, and the complexity of attack surface. On the other hand, the severity or impact of a risk can be determined by factors such as the extent of environmental harm, the financial loss, and the loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability breach that result from a cyber attack. So this is an example 4x4 risk score matrix. So as you can see, each cyber risk in a shipboard system is considered, and based on the definitions we discussed previously, we have evaluated the likelihood and severity of the risks. So from this risk matrix and the table on your right, you can see that the OT subsystems and their associated risks are classified into 3 categories based on their risk scores. So the region of red boxes indicate high risk category with risk scores between 12 and 16, and the region of yellow boxes indicate medium risk category with risk scores between 3 and 9, whereas the region of green boxes indicate low risk category with scores 1 and 2. So now we will look at an example of risk assessment, which is ECDIS in the high-risk region. So the cyber risk addressed here is malware attack through USB ports. So this attack can be easily launched by an insider, for example, a crew member or a technician on board. So when malicious command or code gets executed, it will take the ECDIS system offline. So such attack will result in catastrophic consequences such as collision. So we consider this under high risk. Now, coming to the unique and a very important part of the new guidelines, which is the checklist. Often, lack of crew awareness on cybersecurity and unsafe practices such as usage of default or weak passwords, usage of outdated software, operating systems. These are some of the major causes for cyber attacks. Although there's no guarantee that a ship can be fully safeguarded from cyber threats, necessary actions can be taken to defend against the potential cyber threats. So having such a checklist and checking on the cyber hygiene level of the vessels can help ship owners make sure that the most important safety measures are in place. So the checklist we've provided in this guideline will help ship owners implement mitigation measures for managing the risks. The key features of our checklist is that the checklist is actionable and very easy for implementation. So previously from cyber risk assessment, I mentioned that we classify the systems and their associated risks into 3 categories: high, medium, and low. So the purpose of doing that was to classify the tiers. So to help determine the cyber hygiene of vessels, we introduced the concept of security tiers to list the checklist. So we consider 3 tiers: Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, where a tier of security refers to the urgency of cyber risks of a ship that needs to be managed or mitigated. So next we see how the tiers are defined. So the Tier 1 checklist includes cybersecurity measures for managing high-risk cyber threats, which means that the measures stated under this tier are highly recommended to implement on board vessels. And the Tier 2 checklist includes cybersecurity measures for managing medium-risk cyber threats, which means that the security controls mentioned under this tier are recommended to have on board. So next is the Tier 3 checklist, which is a list of cybersecurity measures for managing the low-risk cyber threats, which means that the measures listed under this tier are good to have, even though the risk level or the urgency is less. So let me show you a sample checklist so for managing the risk from phishing emails, and this comes under Tier 1. So we have designed the checklist in a way that can be used for assessing and improving the cyber hygiene of vessels. So our key motivation is to help in mitigating cyber risk to a possible extent. So first, risk assessment can be carried out, and then identify the risk category, and then choose to mitigate the cyber risk at any one or all of the security tiers or levels, which is Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So to conclude, although adoption of emerging technologies has become very common among the maritime industry, it still opens up many attack surfaces for the hackers to exploit. So the key takeaway from the study is that lack of appropriate security controls on board ships is one of the major reasons for cyber attacks. So it is vital to enforce the necessary security mechanisms in order to restrain hackers from accessing the shipboard systems and also sensitive information. And it's very important to note that even though enforcing technical security measures are important, it is also crucial to consider human factors and also enforce strict physical security measures. And most importantly, the cyber hygiene of a vessel must be assessed regularly to safeguard the vessel from the existing and the emerging vulnerabilities. So in view of this, we developed and published our new guidelines to highlight the cyber risks and the impacts associated with all the OT systems, along with mitigation measures to manage those risks. So the new guideline will serve as a practicable guide for managing the cyber risks in shipboard OT systems and also help in ensuring cyber hygiene in vessels. So finally, the team would like to acknowledge and thank the Singapore Maritime Institute and the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore for their support throughout this project. And we would also like to extend our thanks to ABS, KPMG, CEMS in Singapore Poly, and SSA for their valuable feedback on the draft version of these guidelines. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time and attention. I will now hand over the session to Prof. So to discuss the need for maritime cybersecurity testbed. Thanks again. Prof. So, over to you.
Thank you, Priyanka. Next, I will give a brief introduction of iTrust and our existing cyber physical system testbeds, which have been used in cybersecurity research, training, exercise, and education. I will also share our thought on the need for a maritime testbed and seek opinions from attendees. iTrust is a research center established in 2013 with funding from Ministry of Defense. Our mission is to advance the state-of-the-art and practice for securing complex, interconnected critical infrastructure. iTrust is also a national Satellite of Excellence awarded by NIF in 2019, focusing on design science and technology for secure critical infrastructure to conduct impactful research, seek close collaboration with industry, and push for technology translation. An MOU was also signed with the Ministry of Defense last year for OT security research and training. Next. We have seen a number of cyber attacks to critical infrastructure in the real world. A well-known attack is Stuxnet targeting Iranian's nuclear plant in 2010. Ukraine power grid was also under cyber attack in 2015 and 2016, caused a nationwide blackout. Unfortunately, Ukraine is now under both cyber and physical attacks. Florida water treatment plant, which was also hacked last year. They have tried to poison the drinking water. Another victim was the Colonial Pipeline, which paid $4.4 million ransom to the hacker last May. So we can see there's a strong and urgent need to protect the critical infrastructure. iTrust is the proud host of a world-class, fully functional cyber physical system testbeds. The first testbed is a SWOT for secure water treatment, which was established in 2015, followed by WADI for water distribution in 2016, and EPIC for electric power in 2017. The three testbeds are connected to form a more complex system of systems as in the real world. These testbeds have been used intensively for research, education, training, exercise, and technology evaluation. Now, they are open to global users via remote access via VPN. Our researchers have been using the testbeds to validate new technologies for securing cyber physical systems. Here are some examples of the new technologies being developed in iTrust to protect sensors and actuators in layer 0, PLCs in layer 1, and historians in layer 2 of a cyber physical system. The research outcomes have been published at the top cybersecurity conferences. Many of them have been filed for patent. Some of them are in the process of commercialization. For example, DAD stands for Distributed Attack Detection, provides invariant-based distributed anomaly detection using a plant design. A US patent has been granted and it is being commercialized. iTrust also organizes annual exercise called CISS, stands for Critical Infrastructure Security Showdown, using our testbeds. It was organized jointly with the Ministry of Defense since last year. CISS enables iTrust researchers and commercial vendors to evaluate their technologies and products aimed at securing critical infrastructure. CISS 2021 split to a Red Week and a Blue Week. And the Blue Week provides professional training for CI operators and regulators in Singapore, including PUB, Singapore Power, EMA, Singtel, IMDA, etc. We are now planning for our CISS 2022 with even larger scale to include all of our 3 cyber physical system testbeds and 2 digital twins. iTrust was also involved in the NATO's lock shield exercise last year, serving as a green team to provide a digital twin of SWOT as part of the critical infrastructure for the exercise. This is the largest and most complex international live-fire cyber defense exercise in the world, with more than 2,000 participants from 30 countries. iTrust's main focus has been in water and power sectors. Maritime is a new sector of critical infrastructure being explored by iTrust, which is especially important to Singapore. As Priyanka just introduced, we have developed new guidelines for cyber risk management for shipboard OT systems to support MPA's efforts in developing cyber notation for SRS. There's an urgent need to develop and deploy cyber security technologies for maritime sector. However, we lack a realistic environment for testing and validating new cyber security technologies before being adopted. So we are thinking of creating a maritime testbed to fill the gap. We want to create a multi-purpose shipboard OT testbed. It will be used for research and development of new maritime cybersecurity technologies, for training of maritime professionals, and also providing realistic platform for cyber exercises. This testbed should have a flexible hybrid platform to include essential physical OT equipment. For some components not suitable to be physically placed in the lab environment, they will be replaced with software simulators. We'll also provide an open framework to allow new components to be added in the future. The potential users may include ship owners and operators, government agencies, classification societies, vendors, and training institutions, etc. We expect the testbed will be useful to various stakeholders in the maritime sector. It will also spur growth of research and commercial development of cybersecurity technologies and enhance Singapore's status as an international maritime center. Next. Thank you. If you consider the Marriott testbed is useful for your organization, or you have specific requirements on the testbed, please let us know. Thank you. Now I hand over to Mark.
Hey, thanks, Jenny. We now have Captain Ashwin from Singapore Poly to present his topic on maritime security, a shipmaster's overview. Captain, over to you.
Okay, so thank you, Mark, and my special thanks to iTrust and SCTD for arranging this webinar. Thank you, Prof. Zoe and Priyanka, for your very incisive outlook on maritime cybersecurity. And to my industry peers and colleagues on this webinar. A very good cyber morning. If there is a problem statement, technology is our friend, except when it is not. So ships, while still being able to navigate on water, have undergone monumental changes in one lifetime. Advancements in technology, automation and control, remote connectivity, even autonomous operations. However, what has not changed is the concept of harm. A ship becomes an agent of harm to people, assets, and the environment when it is involved in a collision, a grounding, loss of containment, fire and explosion, structural failure, loss of stability, or any of the above in any combination. So let's see if we can make something out from this exercise.
I'm on the bridge of a ship, which is westbound, steaming at full ahead with a speed of 17 knots. My own vessel is approaching the precautionary area in way of the southern boarding ground. There's the customary traffic around, ships sailing the same direction, and ships in the opposite lane going eastwards. A vessel, blue hull, can be seen coming out from the port and crossing through the precautionary area to join the eastbound lane. In anticipation, the captain decides to slow the ship down. Unfortunately, he is not able to do so because the engine speed has been commanded through a cyber attack. Time is of the essence, and before remedial action can be taken, it collides. This is merely an illustration of one potential failure that a cyber attack can trigger. The end result is harm. Serious harm impacting lives, property, the environment, not to mention loss of reputation and goodwill, and a very bad name for the shipping industry at large.
What I was aiming to show was a collision taking place because the ship was not able to reduce its speed. One of the factors which contributed to the collision. And the reason the ship could not reduce speed was that the propulsion had been commanded by a cyber attack. So therefore, that was an example to lead into what we must understand, that the focus of cyber risk management on board ships has to be, how do we provide effective controls to prevent harm as a consequence of a cybersecurity attack, caused either by a failure of all systems and or a complete takeover by a hostile party. In 2013, engineering students from the University of Texas were able to steal a yacht. And they did that by taking it to a false destination, and the people on board were not even aware. But more importantly, there were two issues: that criminals could actually take over and or corrupt a ship's navigation system and take it over, and that people tended to let their knowledge and training slip and become hostage to their controls. Later, we will have a demonstration of that too. Therefore, cybersecurity is not just a cyber problem, it is an operational one. The modern ship is an array of cyber-enabled engineering systems, which through complex interfaces manage the demands of propulsion, power, navigation, vessel condition, monitoring, fire and gas detection, emission control, environmental monitoring, not to forget the continuous delivery of utilities. A ship is basically a unit that is built for the long term, 15, 20, 25 years, the technology that underpins it will need to run for the length of time. What may be considered good cyber protection at the time of delivery or commissioning of the system might prove to be inadequate to new and emerging threats. And even if a major upgrade were to be taken, a considerable amount of time would have passed after the ship has been delivered. Its vulnerability is not necessarily going to change. BIMCO cybersecurity guidelines mention the growing use of big data, smart ships, and the Internet of Things will increase the amount of information available to cyber attackers and the potential attack surface to cyber criminals. The words attack surface don't go away and are key in the context of today's discussion. Ship systems consist of integrated automation, controls for monitoring, alarm functions, main machineries, navigation, power management, standby pump controls, remote valve controls, tank level measurement, cargo control, engines, starting, stopping, automatic bilge and ballast systems, etc. The systems highlighted in brown on my screen are those that on many ships already remain connected online today. Each system has a certain interaction and dependency on another. Cybersecurity will play a part in many aspects of this interaction and dependency, on the functionality of the system and on the availability and reliability. Additionally, cyber technology is enabling a quantum jump in data transfer between networks, internal and external. Hence, the fidelity and security of that data is vital. Voyage monitoring, engine monitoring, spares and procurement, all of that add to the requirements for proper cybersecurity on board a vessel. So what then is of real interest to the ship's manner, to a ship's captain, and to the ship's officers? It is one word: failure. Because failure then leads to harm. And as we said, harm could be in the form of from a collision, grounding, pollution incident, fire and explosion, and loss of structure and stability. The way to understand harm and prevent harm is to determine what is safety critical. What is safety critical from a point of view of a failure caused by a cyber attack? These systems or equipment items that on failure could cause a major accident or on failure could contribute substantially to a major accident are deemed to be safety critical. For reasons of integrity, that is, if their integrity is maintained, then the major accident event cannot occur. And those systems or equipment items that prevent or limit the effects of a major accident are also deemed to be safety critical for reasons of control and mitigation. That is, these are systems that provide emergency response once a major accident event has occurred. There's also another problem over here, that a cyber intrusion could go undetected for a long period of time. There was a ship recently equipped with a power management system, which could be connected to the internet for software updates and patching, remote diagnostics, etc., but wasn't. It was new, and by intent, they did not connect it. The company's IT department, conducting an audit, discovered a dormant worm, which, if it had become active, could have resulted in very severe consequences. Before the discovery, it was realized that a service technician had been on board the ship and the infection could have come from the service technician. Therefore, the significance of a cyber hazard cannot be overemphasized, and the key controls in the prevention of harm are going to be the validation of cyber resiliency in the design of ship systems and the protection of these systems. So having said that, let's try and see if we can come up with some solution statements. Solution statement number 1, security by design. Most cybersecurity prevention and control methods on ships rely on procedures and not on the engineering and design. Therefore, it should be ensured that the threats are countered through the design of the system and hardware and not through operator interventions alone. And that's where the cyber physical system testbeds, which my colleagues at SUTD have spoken about, can potentially create a unique opportunity to probe, test, and study existing cyber physical systems on board for their cyber resilience efficacy. Are the existing redundancies in the system adequate? Can the existing redundancy in the system ensure that automated processes will not fail in the event of a cyber attack? And more importantly, this can then provide the basis for research and experimentation, education and training, testing the design of safe and secure cyber physical systems, understanding different failure scenarios, and creating real-time simulation-based training. With the realization that cyber threats have the potential to cause considerable harm, every organization must commit itself to a robust risk management framework. So this is solution statement number 2. Priyanka has spoken at length on the different risk categories and the actual ship process and system-based risk assessment. At the heart of it will be an informed assessment of the threats posed to operations, the possible outcomes if adequate controls are not provided, and the consequences if the safeguards are not effective enough. The bow tie is representative of high-level controls that organizations employ as barriers to system failures and accidents. The stronger the controls, the lower the probability of a major accident, hence lower will be the risk. The green boxes highlighted are where the testbed could possibly enhance the controls by validating existing design against cybersecurity, by creating a method to improve on design standards, provide an insight where perhaps there could be an augmentation of existing component arrangements, establish good cyber controls. Likewise, on the right-hand side, where the mitigations are shown, the testbed simulations can lead to better ways at effecting system quarantines when breached, improve system redundancies, which can then loop back into the overall design for the system. It will be key then that the controls are put in place so that a perceived threat is not able to transfer itself into a failure event. Dilute any of the controls or take any of them away, you increase the risk of suffering a cyber-induced failure. Solution statement number 3, compliance and best practices. All cyber risk management activities, including the provision of controls and safeguards, must complement the requirements of the ISM and ISPS codes. Regular auditing of procedural controls and cyber hygiene controls must be carried out. There are excellent resources through government and industry initiatives to aid a proper understanding of the issues in maritime cybersecurity. All agencies dealing with cybersecurity on board and those who have spent considerable resources in researching maritime cybersecurity continuously highlight the vulnerability of these very systems. And here I'm merely acknowledging the source of a lot of the information that these organizations have made available in the maritime domain to individuals, organizations, and institutions of higher learning like ourselves. The cause of cybersecurity is not an idle one. Solution statement number 4, emergency management. The ship could be the subject of a targeted or untargeted attack. The IMO guidelines set out the following principles: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. During emergency management, the emergency planning is as important as managing the incident itself. And the planning stage is, in fact, the overall process of planning for successful operations. Hence, you would ask, what can go wrong? How to prevent it? So as part of the emergency planning itself, you should be looking at your arrangements so that in the event of a response, you will be able to restore as quickly as possible. Solution statement number 5, cyber incident reporting. I mentioned the word failure a number of times. How do we estimate failure? Do we know how many failures are occurring due to cybersecurity? And how will we know unless there is active participation in cyber incident reporting? Only when the numbers start stacking up can you start thinking further on being able to determine the probability of failure. Administrations and industry have a shared concern, especially where major accident events are concerned. Therefore, ships must report any unwanted disruptions, denial of service, changes to system hardware, firmware, or software without the owner's knowledge, the ability to detect and fix a cyber compromised equipment or system presents many challenges, especially when you are out at sea. Then we come to solution statement number 6, and these are not necessarily in order of priority or importance. Solution statement number 6, which is competency requirements. True training and competency is a key barrier to the prevention of incidents. Efforts at training have to reinforce first principles and the method of application of technology. At the start, I had said that people tend to let their knowledge and training slip, which happened in the case of the yacht that was commandeered into a false location. Therefore, vessels are losing the ability of reverting back to traditional navigation. Recognizing this, we at SMA, as the IHL and MPA, as a regulatory body, are extremely particular that the students are proficient in the traditional, coastal, and celestial navigation as well. So now I'm going to walk you through this particular incident.
This is Buffalo Rock, a shoal in the Singapore Straits, and this ship has run aground. Clearly, there's been a big error. Let's see what was actually happening. It is raining, visibility is low. The ship's EGDIS seems to indicate that it is in the eastbound lane and on course. Clearly, it is not. One look out of the bridge portholes shows Buffalo Rock looming right ahead. Something is not correct. Could it be a GPS error? And even more alarmingly, could it be that the GPS was spoofed, even by a small amount? More importantly, an omission on the part of the navigator, who was relying entirely on what the EGDIS was displaying. The navigator let his guard down and now needs to brace for impact. Stranger things have happened. This vessel finds itself aground on Buffalo Rock.
Then solution statement number 7 is organizational leadership and commitment. The company policy is the holy grail of organizational improvement. Leadership commitment is critical. Organizations, I'm sure, mean well. I have never doubted a policy that the organization gives out. However, they state their objectives and goals, and often the validation of the same sometimes falls short, especially with regards to cybersecurity. Hence, it is not merely an IT function. It is a line management responsibility for the entire organization. So this is the summation of what possibly could be done. And to conclude, let me reiterate, if cyber goes rogue, we open ourselves to unwanted and totally unplanned for circumstances. Cybersecurity threats have existed for a long time. Cyber criminal activity will persist. Cyber criminal is always looking for vulnerabilities. We cannot wait for an attack to take place and then look for the solution. My final conclusion, the captain and chief engineer of the ship have a serious responsibility. They must get the assurance that the systems on their ships are reliable and capable of meeting cyber threats head on. Only then is there going to be that confidence that our waterways will stay safe and major accidents can be averted. The master also needs to tell his crew that undoubtedly technology dependence will lead to a cyber risk. However, nothing can substitute for a good pair of eyes, which would have been very useful at Buffalo Rock to prevent the ship running aground. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you all, and I'll be happy to take questions afterwards. Thank you. Back to Mark.
Thanks, Captain Ashwin. We now move on to the Q&A session. At the bottom of your screen, you will be able to see a Q&A button for you to ask questions, to view questions from other participants, and also to upvote their question. And for those who are unfamiliar, by upvoting their question, the question gets bumped up and get a higher priority to be answered. So we have already seen one or two questions being asked. So thank you. Keep that coming in. We may not be able to answer all the questions. So we will collate all the questions that are unanswered and then share it with you guys after the webinar. So I'll be monitoring the questions that are being posted and direct them to the presenter. So the first question that we have is, can you provide an example of a low-risk scenario and a high-risk scenario for propulsion systems?
Okay, so for a low-risk scenario, we consider the internal serial communication between the systems. So we consider it as a low risk because it's very hard to find a way to get into the internal network. So the attacker must be either in the proximity of the vessel, or there must be a serial to IP converter connection so that the interface can be used to get into the communication network. So, and in case of a high-risk scenario, it's the attack surface can be USB ports through which an intruder, for example, a crew member or a technician on board, as Captain Ashwin also mentioned an example right now. So that can be a scenario for high risk. And the second question is, okay, so the severity is different because so based on our definition, I think the severity is level 2. So we say that the functionality of the system may get changed, but then we also consider that the confidentiality is less. So that's why we have the severity reduced.
Okay, and another question is how to prevent hackers from taking over control of the system. I think by system, the person means taking control of the ship itself.
Okay, from my perspective, if I can answer this question, I'll just say that it is a collaboration. It's like how to keep the intruder out. And therefore, if the enemy is at the door, you have to keep him out, and you have to ensure that all your controls are working, are in order. Yet we know that cyber hackers are always, they tend to be looking for opportunities all the time. So there's no one single action that you take to avert hackers. It has to be the combination of your technical controls, your procedural controls, and making sure that compliance is also being met.
Okay, thanks, Captain. There are two questions relating to the test bed that I think Prof. Zo can answer. So one is, when will the test bed be ready? And the second question is, how there are some parties who are interested to collaborate in some R&D efforts in the test bed. So how do they go about doing that? So I think Prof. Zo can answer both questions.
Okay, yeah, we are now in the process for the approval of our proposal to set up this Mariel testbed, and we expect to create this testbed by the end of next year, if everything is planned. Once this testbed is ready and commissioned, we will open our testbed to all the users, and we like our existing testbed operating in iTrust. We provide online booking system to allow anyone to want to use the testbed to make reservation on the use of our testbed. Of course, this one will be charged. You can find the charge rate on our website. We also welcome collaborations with any organizations to either for research, for training, or for other purposes.
Another question for Priyanka. Can you differentiate between risk score 9 and 16 in the matrix when both of them involves the ACDIS as well as other critical shipboard equipment?
Thank you for the question. So to summarize, we consider a few factors when we calculate the likelihood and the severity. So for the likelihood, we take the attack complexity, the ease of access to resources, and the attack surface. And in case of severity, we see the extent of the breach, the confidentiality, availability, and the integrity breach. So in our risk assessment, as I mentioned, we calculate the risk score for each cyber risk in each OT system. And if you want to know more about our risk assessment, it's detailed in the guidelines document. You can access it. Thank you.
Another question we have, shouldn't cybersecurity be part of competencies for management roles for seafarers?
Okay, I'll answer that. Actually, it already is. In our navigation syllabus, when we talk of equipment, then there is a mention of and an explanation of how cybersecurity could compromise these systems. And in the simulator, in the simulations itself, many of our exercises have induced failures where you are changing the data from what actually exists, and we test the students' response on being able to navigate the ship safely, even with these errors that have been induced. And this is where we come back to what I said in my presentation about going back to first principles and not placing a complete reliability on what they see on the screens, and because of this concern with cybersecurity and errors that might be placed. So in answer to this question, yes, this awareness is very much part of the subject when we are teaching it on the navigation as well as in the simulator modules.
Right, thanks, Captain. Another question for Priyanka. Does the risk score take into consideration the manning and crewing requirement of the ship?
Okay, so a good question. We take into consideration the factors that I just discussed earlier, but we do have mentioned that in our mitigation list that there must be awareness among cybersecurity in the crew, and yeah, so that's it. Thank you.
There's a question, I think, for folks from MPA. I'm not sure if there's anyone here. In the MPA SRS notation, I guess it's the cyber notation, there are many checklists about installing anti-malware software on OT systems like radar, VDR, BWS. And the question is whether is such a practice practical. So maybe any practitioner can share their experience with installing such software, whether it is something feasible or practical to do. If not, we can take this question offline. Any other questions? I think there was a question previously about whether the test bed, the maritime test bed that we are building, is it solely for ship or also extended to port operations? Not sure if Prof has answered that.
Okay, for the current plan, we will mainly focus on the shipboard OT systems, but we will also cover ship-shore communication within the testbed. For the port part, we may take it as the next phase. We will keep our architecture of the testbed being open so that in the future we can also include the OT systems, especially for ports, to be connected to the existing testbed.
Just to let everybody know, the presentation slides as well as the recording for this webinar will be shared on the iTrust website as well as our LinkedIn. So do check back, give us a few days to upload them. All right, thank you everyone for your questions. Unfortunately, we now have to conclude the webinar. And may I invite Mr. Daniel Zhang to give his closing remarks, please?
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for joining. I see a lot of attendees here today. So it's very encouraging to see that many have interest in this very important area, right? At least, to find out how will it have implications on your organization. And very interestingly, I was actually reflecting on this cyber security subject, right? So I'm a very interesting analogy that I want to draw to COVID, right? In fact, I'm today on my third day when I just tested positive. So it's a matter. I will take COVID as a matter of when, not so much of matter of how. And a similar analogy can be drawn for cybersecurity, right? Although things are very much taken for granted, right? We felt that we won't get it, but with increasing connectivity, with so much digitalization that's happening, I believe it will be a matter of when. So getting prepared is very, very important. So when I just tested positive, so I'm not panicking at all because I know that I'm prepared for it. I got all the medicines, I got all the procedures, self-isolation, everything is prepared for, right? So I want to draw a similar analogy that, in cyber preparedness, we are fighting against malicious viruses as well, right? So at Singapore Poly, CMS, together with the Singapore Maritime Academy, we will be working very closely with iTrust, not to better understand the cyber risks, but also to explore how we can actually use some of the new initiatives, some of the simulator, the infrastructure that we have to be better prepared and to provide more effective training for the industry. Those are the new initiatives that we will be looking at. So I will take this initiative, the training is really like a vaccine, right? It trains your body to act against viruses. It trains your staff to go and fight for the recovery of, in the case of a cyber attack. And we are here very fortunately that we have, MPA and SMI, that we have the support for research in this very critical area. So we encourage the industry to continue to stay vigilant in this area, and do get in touch with us at MPA, the research community, so that we can jointly protect life and assets at sea. And cyber is going to be increasingly important, no doubt and for sure. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Yeah, back to organizer, Mark.
Thanks, Daniel. Wishing you a speedy recovery and nice comparison between COVID and cybersecurity. iTrust looks forward to a very close and fruitful partnership with Singapore Poly as well. So thanks everyone for joining. We have come to the close of this webinar. And have a good weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy. Check back with us soon. We will also send an email to all the participants, informing them that the slides as well as the video have been uploaded. All right, take care. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.